part of the process. And so we look forward tonight as a district administrative team to hearing your voice tonight. And so thank you all for listening. Now I will turn the microphone over to Scott Varner from our team, who will lead us in this facilitation of the presentation tonight.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Varner. I am the Executive Director of Communications for the district, and I've had the fortune to work with the task force over the past several months. And why they asked me to speak is that as the communications person, they hope that I can take all the work that's been done since April and provide it to you in 20 minutes. So that's our goal here, is over the next 20 minutes to kind of walk you through the work that the task force has done since April, to go through the recommendations that brought you here tonight. And then we're going to transition to the part where we get to hear all of your voices. We've changed things so that we want to make sure that we hear every voice. So when we leave here, we're going to be going into breakout sessions where there's going to be an individual who will be there to listen to every voice that's at the table, so that we can take all of your notes and share that with the task force. You heard Dr. Stanford talk about this task force. He said it was a community-led task force from the very beginning, representing every part of our city and our district. The goal of that task force was to review data and then to help develop that set of recommendations. Now, these just weren't any kind of recommendations. There had to be a rationale behind them. You're going to hear a little bit about that tonight. They had to be supported by data and by some of the policies already put in place by our Board of Education. And finally, as you heard Dr. Stanford share, the goal here tonight is to get feedback. Throughout the month of September, we're going to make sure that we collect as much feedback from the community as possible so that that task force can regroup and put together a final list of recommendations by the end of October. So that's our timeline and goal. I put this calendar up here just so that you can see it has been a very thorough process. This task force has come together a number of times, heard a series of data and presentations, and began putting together their formulation. The goal here, again, as we mentioned, making sure that September's time to make sure we get community feedback, decisions in October. Our board gets to look at all of the recommendations, put their vote in place by November, so that come January, our young people who enter into the school lottery know exactly what's going to happen in the future. We don't want young people to go into that school lottery not knowing what might happen to their school. So that's the purpose of the timeline, making sure that we have this done by November. So let me help kind of explain the process and how this task force came together. As I mentioned, the task force tried to use a set of criteria, but their first and foremost mission was kind of twofold. One is making sure that the use of our buildings is a benefit to our students. Making sure that the use of our buildings is a benefit to our students, and as Dr. Stanford said, not a hindrance to their success. But two, it's also to make sure that we are most effective and efficient with the use of our buildings, with these taxpayer resources that we have. So that's the first two parts of their mission. But with that then, they wanted to break down, how do you look at all 110 buildings? What data sets do you look at? We begin with some of the quantitative data, looking at just pure numbers. We can then look at some of the qualitative information, those things that you don't measure by numbers, but the quality of programming within a building. And then finally, we had to look at impact. Anytime there is change, there's going to be a resulting impact, and we wanted to make sure this task force well understood what impacts there would be. So what's some of the criteria they looked at? So if you look in that first phase when we talk about numbers, the things they looked at were student enrollment. How many students are actually enrolled in all 110 of our buildings? And then second, they looked at, when you look at a building and the students within it, how much of that building are you using? What's its capacity, and are you utilizing all of that building? They then looked at the conditions of the building. Is it an older building? Is it one that's been replaced? Is it one that's receiving some of our repair dollars that were a part of the bond package 2 years ago? And then finally, they looked, as Dr. Stanford mentioned, the transfer in and transfer out rate. That's the number of students who live in a neighborhood and choose to go to a school outside their neighborhood, or vice versa, come into the neighborhood to go to a school, and measuring just that transfer in and transfer out rate. Then the task force began to look at some of those qualitative figures. What type of educational program does the school provide, and are they doing it with fidelity? What about access to the school? Is it safe for students to get to and from the school in terms of sidewalks or bus routes? Is it accessible? Is it ADA compliant? Looking at the future use of the building. Then we even turned to some of our friends at Morpsey to get a better sense of residential trends. What kind of neighborhood growth are we expected to see, especially with families with young students? We looked at grade band design. This is something you're going to hear me mention a few times tonight. As part of that facilities master plan process, where we went out to the community, heard many of your comments and feedback, one thing was loudly clear, that the community wanted to see a return to the more traditional grade band design. That's where you have an elementary, middle, and high school fully designated, that it's K through 5 in that elementary school, and where possible add pre-K. A true middle school, which is 6, 7, and 8, and then a true high school, which is 9, 10, 11, and 12. Back to a more traditional grade banding. We even looked at just the number of work orders. How many times do we send a repair person out to fix a building? So those were some of the qualitative information. And again, as I mentioned, we looked at impact. We wanted to make sure that any recommendation that was put forward by this task force, we had an opportunity to look at what those impacts would be and make sure that it was something that could be done. So let me get into what's brought everybody here, and that's going into the recommendations. My goal here is to go through the 6 recommendations that the task force has made for our school buildings. They also made some recommendations about some of our administrative sites, and I won't go through those up here because I know many of you are here for other reasons, but if you're interested in those administrative sites, if you'll just hang out afterwards, I can walk through those decisions. But let's start with the first recommendation, because I think once we get started, you'll understand some of the things that this task force looked at. So the first recommendation involved these 3 elementary schools on the west side: Highland Elementary, West Broad, and Westgate Elementary. The concern here is that at one of those elementaries, it's a little overcrowded, and there's also a safety issue in terms of young people having to walk across dangerous West Broad Street, very high, busy traffic area. And so this is a pretty easy recommendation. They said you have 3 buildings, let's readjust the attendance boundaries so that you balance out the number of students at each building and prevent walking across a dangerous street. And so it is changing the attendance boundaries at those 3 schools. And when I go to the map, you can see this is a pretty easy one to understand. Right now, this blue area that's shaded, all of the families that live there go to West Broad Street. As you can see, anyone who lives here has to cross West Broad. So what we said is, for anyone who lives in this area, instead of crossing the street, why don't you come over here to Highland Elementary? Highland Elementary is a building that's received some repairs. It now has air conditioning. That's a great building, so why don't we push students over there? For those who live on this side, and this is Hague Avenue, again, another busy street, let's take those students and put them at Westgate Elementary. So with this plan, we balance out attendance at all 3 of those schools, the enrollment. We can better use each of those buildings, and then we actually have an opportunity to put some students in a building that's had newer repairs. So that one's a pretty easy one to understand. Just real quick, by show of hands, is there anyone here tonight to talk about those boundary changes at Westgate and West Broad? No West Siders here tonight? Okay. Well, that will be a very easy table to manage. Let me go to another one, which is kind of very similar, and this involves North Linden Elementary and Mays Elementary. So here we have a school. If we look at North Linden, that's a school that's over capacity. It's very crowded in that building. And neighboring Mays Elementary is not as filled. And so again, we want to balance it out, redraw the boundary lines. At the same time, one of the things that we know is in use a lot at North Linden is our ESL unit. That's our English as a Second Language, our New American Families. Those young people who are still learning the English language, we have a strong unit at North Linden. We would actually probably have to put, if we move some of those students over, we'd probably have to put a new ESL unit at Mays, but that's great because that better serves our ESL, our English as a Second Language community. So let me show you this map. So these are the 2 kind of attendance zones that any family who lives in here now currently goes to North Linden. You'll see this one's blank. That's where the old Northland Mall used to be. So there's really more commercial there. There aren't too many people that live at Menards and So we don't have to worry about students living there, but it's really this area here. Any family that lives here, starting next year, would go over to Mays Elementary. So again, that one's pretty easy. And just real quick, is there anybody here tonight for this boundary change? Oh, I am totally taking those two tables. That's perfect, thank you. Here's where we start to get a little more complicated, and these are going to be a lot of moving parts, and I'm sure this is probably what's drawing many of you here. So let's start with this next recommendation. This involves the schools up here, North International, our Global Academy, as well as Dominion Middle School, Columbus Spanish Immersion, our French Immersion School, Ecole Kenwood, and Hubbard Mastery. So here's the plan that we want to look at. So currently, Columbus Global Academy is housed in the old Brookhaven High School, a building that we're not fully utilizing. We've proposed moving Columbus North International, the program that's there right now, moving all of those students that are in 9 through 12, the high school part, and putting them down with the Columbus Global Academy at Brookhaven. So we create this brand new Columbus International High School at Brookhaven that's for those 9th through 12th graders. And in that facilities master plan process, this is something the community really likes, seeing those two programs work together. And so I think that's a positive win. With that international program moving out of the old North High School, that leaves us with a pretty big building that we want to use. And so the suggestion is Dominion Middle School, which is a school that right now is over capacity. I think they're at about 120%, which means they have more students than space for. We would suggest moving all of those students over to this North High School building. So we'd kind of create a new location for Dominion Middle School that would include not only the students from Dominion, but those 7th and 8th graders that were initially part of the Columbus International High School. But then we'd even go a step further, because this is an opportunity to rethink and reshape kind of the Dominion programming, working with the teachers and the community. We also suggest that one of the challenges that we often see in our language immersion programs, which currently are K-6s, and remember our community said it's not necessarily about wanting those K-6s, but more importantly is we often see a dramatic departure of students going into the 6th grade. So after 5th grade at those language immersions, because they want that middle school experience. They don't have a place to go, and so instead of staying for just 6th grade and then trying to figure out where else to go for middle school, we often see a lot of those young people leave. Well, what if at this new Dominion at North High School we created an opportunity to continue those immersion pathways? So that's the proposal here, is that this will allow us to fully utilize the Brookhaven site, and we've already seen the community support for that. It allows us to kind of recreate that grade banding, but more so it gives us an opportunity to give those young people a true middle school experience. So those 6th graders at our language immersion programs are trying to think of where they want to go. Let's give them a true middle school by which to go to continue on those language immersion programs. It will address the overcrowding that we're seeing at Dominion, and it is comparatively, if you look at Dominion, it's an older building. They would move to that North High School building, which has received about $1.8 million in repairs over the last 2 years, so it's an improved building. But more so, it's that academic component. That building will allow for improved academics because these middle school students will have access to high school features, a high school theater. They'll have access to high school science labs. And it allows us then to create this really unique program, which includes the language immersion. At the same time, it would allow us to maybe address some of the wait list issues. As you know, there's some wait listing in some of our immersion programs. This map just kind of shows, so if you're familiar with the neighborhood, here's currently where Dominion Middle School is located. And this purple area represents the current attendance boundary. If you live in the purple, you would attend Dominion. Instead, we would move these students to this international school, the old North High School here, so it stays within the neighborhood. It's actually pretty close to the center of everything. So real quick, by a show of hands, is anyone here tonight to talk about the North program or Dominion? A couple of people. Well, good. I appreciate you being here, and we'll make sure that you have an opportunity to share your thoughts. Let's move to the final two, and I think this is between these two that probably has most people drawn to our meetings tonight. First, I want to begin with our look at the east side, and then we'll focus in on the south side, because both have very similar plans. If you watched the news last night, we were at Linden McKinley with an opportunity to talk about this with families from the Linden and East neighborhoods. So the plan here, again, as we think about making sure that our buildings are the best use, that we're using them as most efficiently and effectively as possible, the proposal here is that we want to convert Linden McKinley, which is currently a 7 through 12 building, into Linden McKinley Middle School. So it would only focus on middle school. So any high school student that would be either in the Linden or East neighborhood would feed into East High School. So again, Linden McKinley would become a middle school. You would move any of the high school grades, that 9 through 12, to East High School. At the same time, as you know, East High School's feeder pattern already includes a lot of schools, then it would be expanded to include this new STEM middle school. Right now, in that neighborhood, there are a lot of STEM elementary schools that are this K through 6. Again, the proposal would be to take those 6th graders out, 6th graders who are currently in an elementary setting, and put them in a true middle school. They would be in that Linden McKinley Middle School. At the same time, this would also allow us to make sure we're even more so better using that Linden McKinley site to pull the ESL units out of nearby Mifflin Middle School and Medina Middle School. Again, those English as a second language units, we put them into that brand new building, the Linden McKinley building, give them some additional space to improve the offerings that we have for that neighborhood. When we do that, we're actually able to combine both of those schools and close Mifflin Middle School, an older building that anyone's been in. It's a hot building during the summer, and so it allows us to close that building. So again, what are some of the things that does? I think it's important to talk about. It allows us to fully utilize buildings. Right now, when we look at East High School and Linden McKinley, the capacity issue at East High School is only 51%. At Linden McKinley, it's about 76%. So we want to make sure that we are best using our buildings to their fullest capacity. When we do that, we now have 2 middle schools that would be feeding into East that would allow us to kind of fill East. And as Dr. Stanford mentioned, whenever you have a larger student population, you're now able to offer more diverse academic programming. Consider if there's a student population and maybe 10 students are interested in a certain area of math. It's hard for a school to justify having just one class of 10 students for math, for a high-level math. But what if suddenly you double that school population? There are now 20, 25 students are interested in that particular math class. That is something that a school can offer. So again, more students allow for more academic programming. It also allows us to get back to that grade band that the community has said they want to see, that traditional grade banding. It allows for more elementary space. Again, once we start pulling those 6th graders out of those elementary schools, it will now open up space in some of those buildings. First, to give us more room to address some of the non-academic challenges that our young people face. But 2, when money is available, we can then add pre-K. So again, more pre-K offerings. And finally, as I mentioned, it improves our service to our families who require that English as a second language, our young people still learning English, making sure that we're best serving them in that entire neighborhood. A couple of other things, I think. Again, we talk about this true middle school experience. Anytime we can give young people that true middle school experience, we want to be able to do that. It's also about maintaining points of pride. Both East High School and Linden McKinley have a lot of history, a lot of legacy behind them. We want to make sure that by maintaining both those buildings, that we continue to have that point of pride. And finally, for this program, we actually know there's a lot going on here because East High School currently has a relationship with Ohio State. It's a health sciences academy. And so this will probably take us 2 years to implement something like this. So this wouldn't necessarily take effect next school year, would probably be the year after. This kind of just reminds you what that new feeder pattern would look like. So again, East High School allows us to have 2 middle schools now feeding into it. The map kind of shows you what the new East feeder pattern would be. It would include everyone in the purple as well as everyone in the green. This just shows where all of those elementaries would feed into. And again, it would show you that if we pull those ESL units out of these two buildings, put them nearby at Lyndon McKinley, which is a newer building, it would allow us to combine both of these and put everyone into one school. So, by a show of hands, is there anyone here tonight to talk about East or Lyndon and that neighborhood? A couple of people, thank you, I appreciate it. We will make sure that you have areas to share your thoughts on that. Well, I guess that means everyone mostly is probably here to talk about this recommendation, our final one. So I'm great. We so appreciate you being here because as you heard Dr. Stanford share, this is what we need. We need to make sure that we continue to have more of the community's input on this to make sure that it is the strongest recommendation possible. So I'm going to quickly walk through it, and then again, we're going to break up so that everyone can have their thoughts for it. So if you'll give me just a few more minutes to walk through this one, but I think you start to have kind of a basic sense of what it would be. Similar to what we just talked about, our goal would be to convert Marion-Franklin High School into Marion-Franklin Middle School. So the high school grades, I appreciate it, and we're going to hear each of your feedback. Let me just walk through this because I want you to understand what the proposal is, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. I just want to make sure that we all best understand it. So when we get to the next room, our debates are all about, we all know what we're talking about. And so if you'll just let me finish here real quick. But again, the proposal would be to change Marion-Franklin into a middle school. I appreciate it. So I appreciate that. And again, we want to make sure, so we want to make sure we hear all of that. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. That's a great history. So if you'll give me a minute, let me just walk through this again so everyone understands the proposal. So again, by changing it to a middle school, then you're able to shift Buckeye Middle School. So anyone who would be at Buckeye Middle School, that would actually come here now, and we would close Buckeye. At South High School, we would remove the middle school grades that are currently there, the 7th and 8th graders, and that would free up the space to allow for the combination of both Marion-Franklin and South High School. At the same time, with those elementary schools that are on the south side, those are part of those K-6 elementaries, again, where we have 6th graders that are being treated like elementary students, we would pull those 6th graders out and put them in this new Marion-Franklin Middle School. So we'd be pulling students from the south elementary schools and putting them down here at the Marion-Franklin Middle School. When we do that, that actually frees up additional space. And one of the buildings that this task force, the facilities master plan team, has looked at often is looking at Siebert Elementary. I know there are a number of people here tonight to talk about Siebert. We appreciate you here. But whenever we do that, that frees up space that would allow us to take the neighborhood that currently serves Siebert, and there are a limited number of students who actually live in that neighborhood and attend Siebert. Instead, they would be able to attend Stewart Elementary or Southwood Elementary, and that'll allow us to close Siebert. I appreciate it. We want to make sure we capture your comments, but again, let me walk through this. So again, let's talk about the why. Let's talk real quick about some of the whys here. It's about utilization. At Marion-Franklin, the utilization is low. We know at this building we're at 53%. We need to find ways to make sure that we are best using this facility to its capacity by having 9 elementary schools feed into this middle school. We would be able to better use this building. It would also allow us to get back to that grade banding that the community has talked about, that more traditional grade banding that we don't currently have on the south side. It's about academics. Again, the larger student population that you have, the larger student population that you have in a building at the middle school and high school level, the more opportunity we have for academic programming. And finally, it's an improved structure. We know that this building has received impressive investments through Operation Fix-It. It now has air conditioning in many parts. Buckeye does not, and so we want to make sure that that's something that we're making sure that we're best utilizing. That elementary space, again, once we free up that elementary space, those 6th graders are out, that gives us more opportunity to potentially add pre-K in some of those spaces. And again, it's about moving to new buildings. It's about making sure that we provide our students access to newer buildings that have the newer features, including air conditioning. True middle school experience. Again, we go back to that idea for our students on the south side, making sure that they have that true middle school experience, not split up in elementary and high school. And finally, again, it's about a point of pride. We've heard it here tonight. There's a history and a legacy that's in this building. We want to make sure that we do the best to maintain the histories and legacies at both those buildings by keeping them in the neighborhoods. So this gives you, again, that new feeder pattern. You would have all 9 of these buildings feeding into the new Marion-Franklin Middle School, which would then feed into South High School. This will be the new map. Again, I appreciate we're going to make sure to capture all your comments and feedback, but let me get through it real quick. This shows you the current Siebert neighborhood that would be split between Southwood and Stewart. So I probably won't even ask this question because I'm pretty sure most of you are here for this. Am I correct? Perfect. So, as I mentioned, this task force did look at all of our non-academic buildings. And if you want to talk about those, just make sure to stay afterwards. But as Dr. Stanford mentioned, this month is about community feedback. This month is about community feedback. So we had a meeting last night, we have a meeting tonight, we have another meeting this week, another one next week. If you don't have an opportunity to speak up, and everyone here tonight will, but if you forgot something, if there's more you want to add, if there's somebody that didn't make it here tonight, make sure they go online to our website. Make sure they download the Columbus City Schools mobile app, and you can take our survey. In fact, you can get this presentation I just went through is all on our app right now. You can call us. You can call our number at 365-8888. You can even email us, talk to us, or if you're old school and want to write us a letter, here's the information to write a letter. So, as I mentioned, tonight we want to make sure to hear every voice. So we've set up a way in which when we go across the hall, you're going to see tables set up. We want you to sit at those tables. There's going to be an individual or two from the district who is there to record what you have to say. We want to record everything that everybody in this room has to say tonight. We do that by going into each of those tables. Over in the gym is where we will have the main conversations about the Marion-Franklin South Plan. We've set up some special tables in the cafeteria to talk specifically about Siebert. Feel free to go to either, but if you want to share information that this task force should know about Siebert, we invite you to go to the cafeteria. And all of the other plans, there will be spaces in the cafeteria if you want to talk about those specific recommendations. But when you go, so you can share it at every table. So there will be plenty of time. So we still have 45 minutes that you'll be able to share as many comments as possible. Here are the 3 things I want you to think about, though, when you go over there. First, we want to make sure that you best understand what was talked about tonight. Give me just one more minute. If you give me just one more minute, we want to make sure that you best understand what I went through tonight. I know I tried to go through it pretty quick, so if there's one point about it you need more information on, make sure you ask. You'll get a copy of this presentation. What additional information do you think this task force needs to know? Make sure you share that.
He's an interim. Don't do nothing with the interim until you get a superintendent. You went from 8 to 9.
Please make sure you share that. We want to make sure that you... And then the last thing I'm going to ask of you is at those tables, share other ideas. So I've heard some of them. Let's move this to here instead. But when you do that, don't just share the idea simply without some of the rationale. You've seen some of the challenges and opportunities that we have where you can provide an idea that helps a different way to address that. Make sure you share that with these individuals. We want to make sure that we are hearing everything that you have to say, but we also want to make sure that it is based upon the information that we shared here tonight or the other information you think should be brought. So at this time, we're going to move over and you'll be able to share all of your comments next door. So
where is the feedback being collected publicly so that we can all see what is being said here tonight later before the
So again, so I appreciate it. The purpose of the feedback, remember, is to make sure that our task force has all the information they need. So we'll be sharing.
How do we know that our time here tonight is not being wasted?
Well, it's because we're all investing our time too. So we will make sure, and you'll have additional opportunity to see what the task force does, because those meetings are public. So you can make sure that you are a part of those task force meetings. You can watch those meetings. You can also be a part of our school board meetings. So again, the information that you share will be shared with that task force. So I know it's.
And like he said, if this is so important, why can't board members be here instead of somewhere else?
So I'll just answer it real quick. So the board members did have another special meeting that they're in right now. So the board is meeting, but I appreciate it. So let's go ahead and move across the hall. The main gym is where you want to go if you want to hear for the Marion-Franklin South Plan. The cafeteria is for Siebert and any other options or recommendations you want to talk about.